Europe, you can't, there's some exceptions, but in general, you can't get an abortion past 12 weeks in all of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And America has some of the most extreme abortion laws in the entire world. So I look at that whole thing that he originally said, like, 15, I like 15. It's or was it 16? It's a round number or something 16. Like that. It's like, and so the pro-choice people are going to look at him and say, this is crazy because we're pro-choice and we want to kill babies. Basically, we want reproductive justice. And then the pro-lifers are going to look at him and say, dude, that's totally weak sauce. And so I think it's right to back away from that. But think of what we're saying, sending it back to the states.
Yeah, we haven't made any he just is sidestepping the issue. Before he said the 16 weeks, he had said the 16 weeks. So if, people know, they follow us and they've been watching our work. There are federal laws that apply equally to all the states. And then there's certain, and those are very, very few and far between. Truly, the federal government should be very small, with very small enumerated or listed powers. So they can't issue federal laws on things that are supposed to be handled by the states. Arguably, I mean, I do believe that it's a state issue, and that was with the overturning of the decision. It should be a state issue because it has to do.
You think this abortion should be a state issue?
I do not think that the federal government has authority to make laws that affect all of the states. No, I don't think that this is within the enumerated powers of the federal government. The federal government's powers there's like 8. It's to coin money or print money. It's to run the U.S. postal system. It's to declare war, right? We couldn't have California going to war with France and not New York and Florida. All of us have to go. It's to train up and to have like the standing militia, the Navy, the Army. It's very, very, it's truly issues that require collaboration across all the states. We couldn't have, again, California printing money and then Arizona not printing money. Like, we're all printing money and we're all distributing the money, the same with the mails. So it's very, very, it's all truly only national issues. And the federal government is supposed to be very, very small, and it's supposed to be controlled by the states. And the states are arguably supposed to be controlled by the people that live there, the constituents. So I agree. And that's what Donald Trump did, even with COVID, through a majority of his presidency. And like, I think he's completely obnoxious. But I think that he hit the nail on the head on a lot of issues, and people were upset about it because it does create disparities. For example, in COVID, he was like, in terms of like ventilators and getting people or getting different states resources, there are some states that have better budgets that were able to pull and buy and have access to more COVID resources than other states. But again, that's not a federal issue. That was a state issue. In the 10th Amendment police power, you have to be, what's going on in your state. You have to be prepared. If you are a state that doesn't balance its budget and cannot get access and purchase up all the ventilators you need, knowing the demographics, knowing the comorbidities of your constituents, that's your problem. I mean, it's a cruel way to think, but if you think about it, you're asking me if his analysis is appropriate. I think it's an appropriate analysis in terms of federalism. But again, so I agree.
My retort, if I can, to that would just be, the Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident, right? That all men are endowed by their creator with inalienable rights, among whom is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so the states created the federal government and in turn the Constitution to limit the power of the federal government. But that the presupposition of that was that we all agreed that life, that no state can determine who lives or dies by a vote.
Totally separate issue. I totally agree with you.
Yeah. And so the 14th Amendment, right, talks about no person should be deprived of life or liberty without due process of law. And so if an unborn child is scientifically a human being, and there's no ontological distinction between a child in the womb and outside of the womb. Well, you made it through the 6-inch birth canal. Congratulations, you're a person now, and you have 14th Amendment rights. It's totally, so I think, so the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, Roe v. Wade was this Supreme Court decision that hamstrung the states, so to speak, by saying that you couldn't protect a child prior to viability standard, which is a nebulous standard. But what the Dobbs decision said wasn't that we should return this to the states, but it said that the issue of determining that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion, that a decision to regulate abortion has been returned to the states and their, to the people, not the states, to the people and their elected representatives. And so my contention is that if an unborn child is a human being, it's a person, and therefore they should have personhood rights protected on the 14th Amendment.
Which is what you and I have been saying and why this conversation is even happening. So yeah, I completely agree. So it shouldn't be about regulating abortion or not regulating abortion. Exactly. It should actually, and which is, I mean, this is again why the language matters, because, and I do want to put it in the context of COVID, for example, because we don't necessarily have to, but we're allowing them to, it's again, what we've already said, they are controlling the narrative, right? It's about depriving women's rights and, and their right to control their body, XYZ. But if we take it back and we take control back of the language, of the Constitution, of the laws that are on the books, it's exactly what, if we returned to that and stopped playing in their playground, on their, in their stadium, on their fields, we shouldn't even be having a debate about abortion and at what trimester or what week or under what conditions. We shouldn't even be over there. We need to be here, which is human life starts at conception. We have to have a bright line, a clear delineating mark, and it has to be at conception, because then we don't, like you said earlier, the slippery slope. We aren't. So let's just have a bright line. This is where it starts, as acknowledged in the penal code, as acknowledged in the Constitution and in the Supreme Court precedent. This is where it starts. And if in California, murder is the killing of a human being or a fetus with malice aforethought, which is interesting that they do make the distinction between human being and fetus, right? So they're in the law, they're saying that it's a fetus, but they are recognizing that even killing a fetus with malice aforethought is murder. Then we need to be talking about murder. We don't need to be talking about, and I'm a woman and I've had children, and we'll get into that in another time, but I have 3 children, but we aren't talking about this over here. We're not talking about women's rights, and we're not talking about healthcare. We're talking about murder. So we need to take control of the language. And if you asked Donald Trump or Bobby Kennedy Jr., and you ask them, what are your thoughts on banning murder of fetuses or unborn human beings, that would change the narrative. That would change the conversation. And that's what we need to do. We need to take back control of the language and of reality, because that's why they have us spinning in circles over here when really we should be over here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Couldn't